That's a good point, actually. Yeah. You steered me away, but onto a better point than I was going to make, which is...
I do that often.
What would I do without you, Jamie?
Whatever's sort of around and whizzy in 2018, 2019, we'll call it 5G and job done.
Hello and welcome to another somewhat belated Telecoms.com podcast. We've only just got over our hangovers from the event, from the awards special one. But then to make up for lost time, we've got a special guest this week. So there's me and there's Jamie, but we've got William Webb, who is an author and general telecoms expert. Thanks a lot for coming in, William.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
So one of the reasons we've got you here is this week we've been writing a lot about 5G. Indeed. Jamie's been over at an event where everyone was banging on about 5G. I've been getting tons of press releases the whole time about 5G, some of which I've just been saying everyone's just getting carried away. And now you got in touch, and one of the reasons you got in touch is about a year ago. Oh yeah, so just to recap before we get into it. So we've decided we're going to make this a 5G special, and we're going to talk about the bad, the good, and the future of 5G. So you wrote a book about a year ago, is that right?
Yeah,
and
that's right.
I think it was about 5G, but it was mainly quite sceptical, is that correct?
Yeah, so it's called the 5G myth, which kind of gives away the angle of the book to some degree. Came out in November 2016, so almost exactly a year ago. And I think what's interesting actually in the last week is, so go back a year and everyone was convinced 5G was wonderful, utopian. It was going to fix everything, including world hunger. Yeah. And that had been the case almost exclusively until this last week, when all of a sudden, almost out of the blue, Vodafone and BT sort of popped up and said, actually, we think it's full of bullshit, or we can't find a business case. But for the last year, there's been very few people, apart from people like me, who've been saying, well, there is issues with this stuff.
So how was it received a year ago when you were going, hold on a sec? How did people receive it?
So what was interesting then, and I think it comes back in a way to the hype problem, was that when I talk to people as individuals, one-on-one, over a casual conversation, a lot of them would say great stuff. It really has brought out a lot of the issues we've all been thinking. Yeah. But we can't say that publicly.
Right.
And publicly,
why can't they say it publicly?
Because they were worried that it was contrary to the views of their company, or the industry as a whole, or their own interests. Yeah. And quite naturally, and I'm not being critical. And if I were in their shoes, I would have done exactly the same thing. If you work for whatever, Nokia or Ericsson, you can't suddenly pop up and say, by the way, there's big problems with 5G, because clearly that's completely contrary to what their companies have been saying. Okay. So I had that sort of private reaction, and a few individuals who were sort of like me, more free agents, would agree with it. But other than that, by and large, the big players just, I think, ignored it, or perhaps even didn't spot it.
I see.
So it's sort of been out there and
festering.
Yeah.
And so so sort of full disclosure, in terms, for people, we were chatting about this earlier. Normally, if you say something people disagree with, they might try an ad hominem attack and sort of claim that you're biased or you're corrupt, or that you're in somehow not incentivized to only give a certain perspective. But you're an author. Obviously, you got books that you'd like people to buy, but I think you were telling me earlier you're not about to buy your first sort of yacht in Monte Carlo on the back of your book sales.
No.
And you're a consultant, which is your day job, yeah?
Yeah.
So people get you in because they assume you know what you're talking about on matters of wireless.
Yes.
And then you're also involved with Weightless.
Yes.
Which is an IoT standard.
The standards body, yeah. So I run that as a
So that's the full disclosure. Yeah. We've got all your interests out there. So if people want to accuse you of being biased, there we are. There's the ammo. Use it or don't. Now, before we go back onto some of your experiences, I want to turn it back to Jamie, because it's Jamie that was reporting on a lot of this stuff. So it was actually a Huawei event, funnily enough, and you were pleasantly surprised, weren't you? Because when it's a vendor event, we kind of assume, us jaded hacks, that it's just going to be full of propaganda and self-promotion, all that sort of thing. But they had some interesting speakers, and those speakers were saying interesting things. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you covered?
I mean, it was, when it's a customer event like that, you just assume that it's going to be a massive vendor up on the stage, sort of, just spouting all the time. And I think it was quite refreshing. They had a really, really good set of speakers up there, and to be completely honest, they were quite frank as well. There wasn't a company line to be towed there. They were actually talking sense and actually saying some useful things. I mean, it was still relatively guarded, but at the same time, it was, still, quite honest talk. Like Gavin Patterson. He was up on the stage and
cough, Hasselhoff, cough.
Yeah, best looking man in broadband.
There we go.
And he just turned around and said, "We're struggling with 5G."
Right. Full stop.
We're struggling.
A bit of a mare.
We're struggling to justify it from the perspective of finding the use case, moving away from 4G when they haven't actually cashed in on the money that they've already spent on that, and then the other thing is it's just ludicrously expensive. You've got to put up so many more points of presence, and that is just expensive. Right. Until that can be brought down, it's just.
So it's the ROI thing.
Yeah,
what's in it for us?
They're not getting enough money back in, and they're spending too much money going out. That is when you look at it as a very simple equation like that. It just doesn't make sense at the moment.
And what was the Vodafone guys' problem with 5G?
Overhype.
Right.
In the same way that 3G was overhyped, it was an evolution, not a step change. It's the same sort of thing for 5G. Right. 2G and 4G, there was genuine business cases for it, and this is something that was brought up as well. 3G to 4G, what was the reason for that? It was you had crap internet on the 3G, 4G you had really good internet, and in some cases 5G is going to give you better internet, but
we've already got quite good internet.
What's wrong with the internet? I mean, I got
the difference between crap and good and great.
Yes,
is different, isn't it?
Yeah, no. So there's no genuine drivers.
Right. And it reminds me actually of an interesting observation that a few have made, which is in the world of cellular, the odd number generations do really badly, and the even number generations do really well. And like all these things, it's a bit of a generalization, but there's some sense behind it, and that's because typically the odd number generations have tried to do something new. 1G was the first stab at doing cellular altogether. Yeah. And you put it out there and you discover it doesn't work quite right. And then the even one comes on and fixes the known problems. Right. And you can do that quite well because you can say, look, there's a problem. Security is crap in 1G. We'll fix that. And you can fix it. And you come up with something and it works really well. And then 3G was a sort of bit of a stab into the unknown. We'll try mobile data. Yeah. Oh, didn't get it quite right. Okay, 4G, we'll fix that. We'll have an all IP core and all this other kind of stuff. We'll make it work really well. And 5G, of course, is doing just the same thing. It's kind of leap into the unknown again. Yeah. So it runs all the same risks as 1G and 3G of effectively coming up with stuff that it doesn't get quite right. Yeah, yeah. And then
everyone's we got that sort of Gartner hype curve, and we got the trough of disillusionment and all that sort of thing. So it strikes me that another problematic thing, these Gs tend to be on about a 10-year cycle, don't they?
Almost exactly a 10-year cycle, actually.
And then going by what you say, where we only get it wrong alternate times, we're actually getting it right on 20-year cycles. Now, the business world and the world in general doesn't tend to have the patience to wait for 20 years for something to play out. So do you think, perhaps steering back to what you might have said in your book, which I must say I haven't read, so I'm kind of groping around in the dark a little bit here.
I can fill you in.
I'm second guessing a little bit here. But is that part of the problem? One thing we take the piss out of a lot in our writing is the overhype.
Yes.
Yet another, I was writing about it today, yet another thing saying we're going to be the best at 5G, and then another company yesterday. Yeah. And, we're just building up to this big standard freeze by 3GPP in about a month's time. Yeah. So I think that's one of the reasons why everyone's getting their knickers in a twist. But maybe...
I think just in terms of getting the knickers in the twist, in terms of 5G, I think another reason for it is the realization of how much money they're going to have to spend. Right. I think they're trying to scale back a little bit, set expectations.
As it gets closer, they're sort of panicking about it a bit more.
Weaken the appetite and stronger their negotiating position when it comes to sort of talking to the vendors about 5G upgrades. It's if you go into a negotiation going, we're all about 5G, we're going to be amazing. There's no option aside from 5G. The vendors are going to go.
So that's a good point, actually. Yeah. You steered me away, but onto a better point than I was going to make, which is
I do that often.
What would I do without you, Jamie? Which is this stuff that Jamie's writing about, these operators being Debbie Downers at this event, and you noticing that they've only just started piping up. Yeah. Even though some people have been talking about this for quite a while. Do you think this is it? Do you think Jamie's right? Do you think the strategic reason why the likes of Vodafone and BT are saying these things is to try and manage down expectation and improve their negotiating position with the vendors and that sort of thing?
No, I think it's actually honest that they are seeing these problems, and the question for me is, why the hell didn't they say this stuff earlier?
Yeah.
Now, and actually, history often repeats itself. If you go back to 3G, the operators by and large feel they got a pretty bad deal out of 3G, and
especially the auctions and
stuff.
Yeah,
and most of them will say 3G never quite worked right. And therefore, we intervened quite heavily in the 4G design process. We were there in the standards bodies. We were there telling the vendors what we wanted from 4G, because we didn't want to end up with another system like 3G that didn't really work.
Yeah.
And 4G came out nicely. But they didn't do the same in 5G. They seemed to forget that they needed to do this. Maybe they thought it was all fixed now. They could just leave it to the vendor community.
So you think they've been less proactive?
They've been less proactive. They've left it to the vendor community to come up with all these fantastical ideas as to what you might do with 5G. And I think the problem is as well that they need to speak with one voice, because if one of them just stands out and says something, they run the risk that they appear to be the sort of the skeptics, the ones that aren't future oriented, the ones that don't want to embrace whatever the brave new world is. And that might be a problem for them, both with their customers and with regulators and with governments and so on. So it gets harder as the hype builds. It gets harder to put your hand up and say, this stuff isn't going right.
So if they're speaking with a common voice, are you suggesting that there's maybe there's like a big operator dinner they have once a month where Patterson and the CEO of various other sort of operators get together and just go, right, what's in it for us?
Well, and it's interesting in
stopping short of operating like a cartel. we hasten to add.
Yeah, I don't know, but it was interesting in Jamie's piece that he reported that Gavin Patterson had said that he had talked to lots of other CEOs, and none of them could come up with a use case either.
It was something that was said on stage. I mean, he literally said, I speak to CEOs all the time, and we're all struggling. It's not. He wasn't talking when he said he wasn't talking about all of us at BT. He was talking about all the people at the top level, at the top table. I think that someone like some of the vendors are going to wake up get a very bad shock in the next couple of years. Who, certain ones are in really good positions in the 4G market, and the ones that are waiting for 5G are going to have a really nasty shock.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask William, in terms of your book, or how you perceive things now, or how you think general commentators, can you summarise, in my words, why 5G is bollocks?
Sure. So I think, first of all, you've got to say 5G is so nebulous. If you ask different people, they'll give you different answers to 5G. So I think what doesn't make any sense at all is the super high speed stuff, which of course is what all the headlines tend to be about. We've demonstrated 5 gigabits a second in our lab. That doesn't make any sense because there's no use case for it that makes any sense that anyone's going to pay for. Frankly, 4G speeds are more than fast enough for the average person with their average handset, and getting faster. And actually, once you get beyond 5 or 10 megabits a second, you don't notice any difference at all because there's no application that requires that.
Especially on 5-inch screens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all that kind of really high speed stuff doesn't make any sense, and the only rationale I can think of why people have gone down that route is because every previous generation has been faster. So you kind of extrapolate and say, got to be faster, got to be faster.
It's very marketable as well.
Yeah, it's
very marketable.
Exactly. You can say, look, we've beaten this other company, we've got even faster.
Technology normally sells on numbers. You look like if you go and buy a Hoover or something like that, you buy on the amount of watts as if that's going to make it a better Hoover. It's probably got nothing to do with it. It's probably just very energy inefficient.
Exactly.
But people understand that more is better.
It's better. So that doesn't make much sense. And also, the low latency stuff doesn't really make much sense either. First of all, it's extremely hard to do. And if most connections actually have got a lot more latency outside of the cellular network. If you want to get to a server somewhere in the US, you've got about a 50 millisecond round trip delay just getting there and back. So all this sort of banging on about.
It's not the air interface; it's the distances.
Often not. Yeah, and even all this stuff about virtual reality headsets and so on. Actually, most virtual reality headsets have got a frame refresh rate of 100 hertz, which means it takes 10 milliseconds for the next video frame to be displayed on the headset. Okay. So you can't do anything faster than 10 milliseconds anyway. So all trying to get 5G down to 1 doesn't make any.
But isn't it at risk of getting all technical and getting out of my depth, which I do regularly in this job that I somehow managed to fluke a few years ago? Isn't the stuff you were talking about the distances back to servers, isn't part of the point of 5G supposed to be like mobile edge computing and tackling it on that basis, i.e. getting the servers closer to the base stations and thus cutting out some of that round trip?
Yeah, so that's something you talked about a lot. I mean, it amuses me actually that on the one hand, people talk about mobile edge computing, which is putting lots of computing power, as you said, in the base station. On the other, they talk about virtualized RAN, virtualized radio access network, which is taking the computing out of the base station to put it back in the cloud to save money, which is going to play out. Now, it doesn't make much sense to put all the computing power in the base station because actually most of the messages don't stop there. They have to go back to some server somewhere anyway.
Yes.
So the chances of being able to do much sensible processing there are pretty slim. And it's a big investment from the operators who've got to go put this stuff in.
You sound sceptical about a lot of the sort of talk around mobile edge computing in this context on the whole. Is that correct?
I think that's right, yeah. I think that the mobile networks, by and large, should stick to what they do really well, which is essentially bit pipe transmission of data.
Right.
And the processing should be done where it's done well, which is in the cloud and other places like that. And I can't see quite how you're going to make anything else work well. Now, if you really, really, really want to do tactile internet, remote surgery with very, very low latency, then yes, that may be the only way you can do it. Don't slag that off,
I'll get in trouble with King's College again.
But the business case for that is even more remote than the business cases for more general, high-speed stuff. So all this is technically possible, and you can certainly demonstrate it and so on. But I just don't see any sense
in the short and mid-term.
Yeah.
So there's three basic pillars.
Yeah.
So I think, let's say for now we've covered the why 5G's rubbish angle. There's three basic pillars to how people are positioning 5G, which is the enhanced mobile broadband. It's the low latency stuff, and then one we haven't covered yet, which is the sort of massive embedded IoT, narrowband, all that sort of jazz, which you obviously have a professional interest, as we said at the start.
Absolutely.
Do you think that then might be a more positive sort of manifestation of 5G?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, just to briefly go back to the enhanced mobile broadband,
sure.
I think there is a reason for enhancing broadband, and it's what I call consistent connectivity. Actually, whilst we don't need to go faster than 10 megabits, there are plenty of places where we can't get 10 megabits at the moment, on a train, deep inside buildings, all sorts of other places. Fixing that would be really valuable. So 5G that is focused more towards making sure we can get really good service everywhere would be a really good idea. And that, I think, is what's sometimes called HETnets, heterogeneous networks, bringing together Wi-Fi and other networks, making them work.
It's true, that was a bit more of a sort of trending topic a few years ago than
now,
isn't it?
And it's a difficult one for the community because actually it doesn't benefit any one individual player. So mobile operators don't like it that much because effectively it means you go off onto a different network that they don't control. What's the advantage in them for that?
Yeah.
The Wi-Fi community quite likes it, but they're a broad range of individual entities.
And they're a bit worried about Wi-Fi signal getting hijacked by cellular and stuff, aren't they?
Yeah. So, it's sort of a diffuse issue where it's clearly in the interest of the end user, but at this point in the sort of process, there's no one entity really pushing it hard. The closest is perhaps Google.
When has that ever mattered, though?
Yeah.
Who cares about the end user?
Yeah.
Poor old us.
Yeah.
Well, we're the ones that they want our cash. They've got to care about us a bit, haven't they?
They have. And actually, it's a sensible role for governments, actually. And governments have got 5G plans. And some of those, if focused around better end user experience on things like trains, could be quite sensible. And actually, that's where the UK has been done quite well. If you look at the stuff that came out of the National Infrastructure Commission, it talked a lot more about 5G readiness, by which it meant improving the overall connectivity models around roads and rail and other places like that, which does make more sense and is actually kind of an entity that's outside of the commercial world, kind of driving everyone in that direction. But come back to IoT. I'm a very firm believer in IoT, as you rightly said. I run a standards body, so I've got a lot of self-interest. I co-founded a startup on this a while back that eventually got sold to Huawei, so I've been in that space for a long time. And I still believe it's really important, but I think it's really important for industrial productivity.
Right.
I don't see us as individuals kind of having everything in our lives connected, but I do think, to coin the Huawei example, the connected cow is really important. Right. Things like
perhaps Jamie, you can tell us why do we want to connect cows?
So it's It's just an efficiency thing. It's just making money.
How do you make money out of a connected cow?
So basically,
you know where it is when it's milky time.
Well, you know where it is all the time, so you don't have to pen it in. So you can actually, you can keep track of where it is, so it can roam further, eat better, get healthier. But then you can keep an eye on its health all the time. You can basically check when it's the optimum time to milk it is, and all that sort of thing. So it's just like getting better at reading when you got to milk a cow and how to treat a cow better.
Just using geographical and biometric stuff.
But they were saying they were using stuff like so in terms of the yields in the study that they did, I think they connected sort of like 100,000 cows in China or something like that. Right. And it was like on average it was over the year $420 better off per cow. So if you've got a flock of 100 cows, that's that's 42 grand that you're better off for. Indeed. An investment of they reckon that for every cow the ARPU is $10 per month. So you're getting quite a solid return,
right?
And
presumably for like business planning, it's all quite obvious. This is what you're going to have to pay for the modules and for the service. But here's the demonstrable ROI. There's the maths.
Yeah, so it's all very straightforward.
Yeah,
and I think you see the same in, for example, streetlights. So quite a lot of streetlights are now connected because it's actually cheaper to put a little transmitter on them to turn them on and off and to check when the bulb's blown and stuff like that than it is to send people out forever tweaking with them. So I think IoT will have a lot of what I call productivity improvement use cases, where the business case is pretty straightforward. You pay this much for the service and your profitability goes up by that much because you need less people or you get more efficiency from your assets or whatever it is. And that to me is a big deal. But it's going to take a while. It's not going to suddenly go off at a
for the mass market, we're not really going to care.
No,
that farmers are able to milk their cow at the optimum time and that sort of thing. As long as our milk's still there at Sainsbury's.
But this is the one thing that irritates me a little bit about the IoT argument. Like I get IoT is going to be a really, really big thing when it comes to 5G. But we can do it now.
Yeah, so exactly. So I you can label it 5G and that's fine. And actually, my take is, when somebody once said tongue in cheek, but I think it's true. Whatever's sort of around and whizzy in 2018, 2019, we'll call it 5G and job done. And I think that's actually what will happen, strangely. And essentially, with IoT, we'll take all of the stuff that's pretty much already available with IoT, which you can do within 4G using narrowband IoT and LTE-M. You can do it in unlicensed spectrum using the organisation I represent or some other systems. And in fact, nobody at the moment in the 5G standards world is saying they're going to do anything different. They're just saying we'll take all that stuff and we'll
standardise it.
We'll evolve it over time. Right. So actually, it's all 4G IoT, but we'll probably call it 5G.
Yeah.
That's fine. Who cares?
We're calling everything else 5G.
Exactly. So the idea of IoT in 5G is fine, except it doesn't really need to be anything different from what we've currently got.
Right.
But you can label it 5G.
As it scales up, the requirements for 5G will be there. As we got how many? I think there's about 7.5 billion smartphones on the planet at the moment. It's at about 110% penetration for every person or something like that. Something ridiculous. But there is, as soon as we get to 14 billion devices on the planet, then we can probably still do it with 4G then. But then when you get to 21 billion, then you think, right, okay, this is where the capacity starts to become an issue. That's why we need 5G. So gradually the IoT use case will emerge, but it's going to be over time. Like we don't need it now.
Hence the need to slightly chill out a little bit at the end of 2017 on what a massively big deal it's going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, and if you go back to 2010, that's the time when Ericsson and Cisco popped up and said, IoT, wonderful, 50 billion devices by 2020.
Yeah.
Now we're a million miles away from that. Right. So that prediction was way over the top.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone's now going to say 50 billion devices in 5 years or whatever. It's going to take a while. But it'll probably get there in the end. Actually, that's still only 10 devices for every person. So if you can imagine all these other
stuff we've got,
all the other stuff you've got, it's not unreasonable. But it's going to take a while for the various use cases to grow and for the companies to gradually implement it.
So we've been looking a little bit further in the future. We'll get towards the sort of final bit. I want to ask you, your big part of your what you do is predicting the future. So I know I'll speak on your behalf briefly because we were chatting about this earlier. But you wrote a book on predictions around about year 2000, and quite a lot of them, especially to do with the mobile internet, and specifically in terms of like broadband bandwidth that we have now, were very accurate 17 years down the line. So well done on that one.
Thank you.
But the pressure's on now.
Yep.
You've set a bar high. So why don't you? I know you've written a book and you're looking sort of 5, 10, 20 years in the future. Let's restrict it for the purpose of this podcast to some of your predictions in your book in our space, in the telecom space, for let's say the next sort of 5 years or so. Are there any that sort of spring immediately to mind?
Yeah, so I mean the first one is actually IoT, which we just talked about, which is that actually that will grow reasonably strongly over the next 5 years, and we'll start to see that becoming pretty widespread, and we will have national IoT networks and things like that we haven't got at the moment. So that I think is something that I see changing. And also, I think we'll see a lot more sort of apps and over-the-toppy kind of stuff that works really well for leisure, like cycling, my hobby, places like that. All sorts of new ideas and concepts.
And what will those apps do?
So a lot more sort of interactive social media. So, I might be out on my bike, I might get a message saying, actually, one of your mates is also out cycling. If you both head to this junction, you'll meet up with each other if you fancy doing that. And by the way, you're now 3 minutes down on your personal best time. Would you like to ride a bit faster, but your heart rate's looking a bit rubbish.
So sort of constant interaction and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So all that sort of stuff. And actually, from an IoT point of view, I've got one of my bikes has now got 6 wireless sensor systems on it, which sounds a bit ridiculous.
Sounds like you're really into your bikes.
Yeah, I like my bikes. It's I can almost afford a new one each time I publish a book, actually. So that's
okay.
That's
your hidden agenda.
Exactly. Yeah. Get a new bike from out of this. So, in terms of that, I think there's a lot of stuff to go there. But actually, that doesn't require any significant change in the underlying networks. So back to the point that there's no rush to rush out a 5G system. So that I think will change.
What about consumer IoT? Is everyone going to have a sort of connected home and a smart fridge and
so that was
robot serving them breakfast and all that sort of thing?
No. So that was the thing I got most wrong in the 2000 predictions. That I said we would have a certain degree of smart hominess, and I sort of thought that you'd wake up in the morning and stuff would happen around the home that would sort of make your life a bit easier, and that hasn't happened at all. It's interesting to sort of reflect on why hasn't that happened? Why haven't we all rushed out and bought connected lighting systems and connected door locks and connected this, that, and the other? And I think the realization has hit that you can do all this stuff, but frankly, you've got better ways to spend your cash than buying a smart kettle or the apocryphal smart fridge, which is the jokes in this world now. So first of all, it doesn't really make enough economic sense for you to want to go do it. And secondly, more recently, all the scares about people hacking into your home system via connected kettles or connected dolls or whatever, I think quite rightly is making people think, if I get a connected security system, is someone just going to hack my home and then either I can't get in or they can get in or something bad's going to happen.
Sometimes a good old metal key.
Exactly.
You can rely on that good old analog key.
And I just love the use case. So the new Amazon Echo, they had a little video clip, and the guy who designed it or whatever said, it's fantastic. You can be on the side in the kitchen. You can walk into the kitchen in the morning. You can say, "Good morning, Alexa," and it'll turn on the lights and turn on the kettle. And I thought, I don't struggle too badly to do those manually myself.
You're not
actually,
sitting there going, "What a nightmare that is." Yes, well, it's a classic thing. I always say this. Certainly, when I used to visit the CES big tech show at the start of the year in Vegas, a lot of it seemed to be solutions looking for a problem.
Exactly right.
And there is a bit of that. So we're almost out of time. I can't resist this, Jamie. You, for this whole of this podcast, you've been playing a game on your phone. I want you to tell the rest of the class what's so good about that game.
It's just incredibly addictive.
Yeah? What happens? What do you have to do in it?
No, it's very simple. It's called Bouncy Ball. And it's like piano is what I'm talking about. The developers, they do another game, and it's they're all addictive.
They're called Ketchup.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. But I think I want to put out an idea, a prediction for what's going to happen in the next couple of years. And I reckon it's around the sort of the IoT sort of space. Well, I suppose it's not really, but it kind of is. I reckon you're going to have receptionless hotels before too long.
Yep.
Oh, right. Just steam in up to your room.
You walk in, you've got Wi-Fi and location, you've downloaded their app, you walk into a hotel, it recognises that it's you, it sends you a message to the app. You can walk straight up, so it tells you what room you're in, you walk straight up, you use your biometrics to open the door.
Yep.
then
or just your phone again.
Yeah, use your phone again, or then you go in. It's a connected fridge, so
yay!
It's
Finally a use for the connected fridge.
It's a connected
so it
fridge.
can check out when you go on a binge on the minibar.
It knows exactly how much is in and out of the minibar. Then you get it's automated billing straight through to credit cards.
To be honest, so before this job, as I probably said before, I was a smartphone analyst, and I started getting interested in smartphones from a journalistic point of view around about 2007.
Yeah.
So you're pointing out when we were chatting before that the reason that a lot of this mobile internet stuff took a little while to play out wasn't even necessarily the infrastructure; it was the user interface, and that's what Apple and then Android revolutionised. And that really captured my imagination, the sheer amount of power you've got in this black rectangle in your hand. And I've been recently making myself use Android Pay when I'm travelling on the tube or when I'm getting my breakfast from Sainsbury's downstairs and all that sort of thing. And I was talking to Jamie about it, and we were thinking, what's left? I probably don't need a wallet now, except for keeping my notes in my actual cash notes. But then maybe, I don't know whether you can use these things for using ATMs, cash point machines, or maybe you can.
You can use on some.
So I basically don't need my wallet anymore. We just need to get to the stage where I don't need my keys. And as Jamie was saying, I don't need my passport to travel. And then absolutely everything. And, in Jamie's utopia where you check into a hotel and you raid the minibar and it's all done via your phone.
What happens when your battery dies?
So as if you didn't hear that, producer Pierre said, "What happens to your battery dies?" I mean, it just makes it even more important that you carry around those little. I always carry around a little charger thing. I've got a little charger thing, but yes, that's obviously you're in shtuck if that runs out of juice.
So actually, a few points around that. So first of all, I agree with Jamie. And in fact, if you go to a Premier Inn now, you're not far off that actually, except that you check in at a kiosk in the lobby and it prints out a little room card, but it's not that far off.
Have they got a little hologram of Lenny Henry?
Yeah. and actually, the reason they do that is cost saving, of course, because then they can do away with the receptionist.
Exactly.
So my prediction is you'll get exactly that in low end hotels. But you'll actually pay for the high-end hotels to have a smiling receptionist because that's kind of part of the service and the package.
So basically, human beings have become a premium product.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they were talking. Like someone mentioned it the other day, and human interaction will be a premium. Yeah. Like, there's no reason if I could buy a coffee from a coffee machine and it won't be any better than the crap they serve you at Starbucks, but because it's been prepared by a barista and they've put your name wrong on the side of the cup so you can Instagram it,
you've got the whole experience and you exchange a smile with them and all that sort of thing.
I completely agree with you for the high end stuff, and that's why humans will never be made redundant, because
we need to interact with humans.
We need interaction, and we like interaction.
Even misanthropes need to bump into other people every now and then.
And then to your other point about kind of is there more left? Actually, so when I made my 2000 predictions, I said by 2020 we'll be able to do pretty much everything we could possibly want to do with a sort of connectivity type issue. And at that point we'll need to pause because we need to understand what this is doing to society, where we want to go. We need to solve all the problems that come downstream. And I think actually that's happening now. So all the kind of 0 hours contracts.
Right.
The gigabit society or the gig economy, that's what they call it.
All the problems of mental health that are happening amongst teenagers, all this other kind of stuff. We've got to sort it out. And I'm not saying we should stop using digital at all, but we've got to realign the way we live our lives. And actually, I think that will slow down the rate of change over the next 10 to 20 years as we sort that stuff out.
Cool. So the barriers are more sort of cultural rather than technological.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. On that note, thanks a lot for coming in. That's fascinating, William. It's great to have you here. And I hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you join us for the next one.